fundamentally, is our region in a place and time where coal is going away?
Oh, absolutely, no question about it. The laws that have passed in Oregon and Washington in particular in the last couple of years, and the decisions that have been made prior to that by the utilities at the behest of regulators, have us on a path towards reducing coal, headed towards zero over the course of certainly the next 5 to 10 years.
And when that goes to zero, will there be enough power to replace it?
We measure things in terms of loss of load probability in the Northwest. And traditionally what we said is anything above 5% is kind of the magic line where you'd say that's a problem. We are forecasting 7 to 8% loss of load probability over the course of 21, 22, 23. And when we get to 24 and 25, we're looking at a 33% loss of load probability. And that is pretty much unprecedented.
And that's only 6 years from now.
Yeah, it's coming up pretty fast. And in our world, when it takes a long time to build generating resources, to put in place demand response programs, to build transmission, yeah, we are quite concerned about whether we have enough time to be able to address this issue.
And when you talk about load, what was that phrase you used? Load?
Loss of load probability?
Yeah. So basically what you're talking about is when you turn on the lights, is there enough power to turn them on?
Yeah, that's the key thing. I mean, the expectation certainly of consumers is I flip the switch and things are going to happen.
Yeah.
And what we are seeing right now is very complicated metrics, but the bottom line is we're headed towards a period when it's less likely that it will work as well as it has in the past unless we take action. And that's the key to this conference. It's trying to cause people to say, we need to take action.
Okay. And with that, we'll get on to taking the action in a sec, but with that 30% probability, 1 out of 3 times when these scenarios are run, it runs into trouble?
Yes.
Is that what that means?
Yes. Roughly
Wow.
that period of time you would expect to have, again, that would be 6 times what we've considered to be adequate in the past, and we've always tried to be below the 5% loss of load probability in the past. So it's a pretty significant change. I've said before unprecedented, although not completely unprecedented. In 99 and 2000, prior to the West Coast energy crisis, we were forecasting loss of load probability of about 24%. So
Wow.
a little bit less than what we're forecasting for 25. And we saw the consequences of that. Now, it's been a long time, and I worry that people have forgotten about that or moved on and done other things. You know, it's been close to 20 years since then. But I was in charge of the Bonneville Power Administration at that point, and I was confronted with extraordinarily difficult and even moral challenges, I would say. So, for example, we basically put 5,000 aluminum workers out of work. We shut down the aluminum industry because we didn't have enough power to be able to serve them.
And this was in the Dalles, right? You went out and said, hey, you guys need to shut off?
That was one of the places. We had there were 10,000 aluminum jobs spread across the Pacific Northwest. And basically half of those folks lost their jobs at that point in time. And just to put a human face on that, because I did a lot of public meetings back then, we know that when someone loses their job and they're a primary breadwinner in a family, that there is a very high likelihood of an increase of alcohol abuse and domestic abuse. So this is not just somebody lost their income, it's the consequence that flows through families. I dealt with mayors who said, well, wait a second, you know, we're shutting down businesses here, which means the property taxes are going down. That means we're not gonna have enough money for roads, for schools, for low-income assistance. All of those kinds of support services that are critical services that are provided were compromised as a result of the damage that was done in those years. And there was an environmental cost as well, because we chose, because of the incredible financial consequences that we were looking at, it was extraordinarily expensive to try to serve load at that point, to cut off spill on the hydro system, which is we spill water over dams to help juvenile salmon get downstream, and put it through turbines instead in order to produce electricity. And the tribes in particular felt that we were doing tremendous damage to the salmon runs, and that's the core of their culture. So you put it all together, the economic impacts, the impacts to communities, the impacts to families, the impacts to the environment. These are choices that we knew were at risk in 99 and 2000, although I don't think we fully comprehended it could be that bad. And today, the circumstances are not exactly the same, but eerily similar.
Wow. That must have been excruciating as a human being who cares about people.
Oh my gosh, I can't. It was the most scarring event of my career and even of my life, I would say, to go through that period, to be in a position of having to make those choices. There was no, you don't get to make a choice. You had to make choices, and those choices were extremely difficult, and I'm going to come back and use that word again. They were moral choices. We did everything we could to try to make sure that we could keep the lights on and try to make sure that the financial consequences were minimized, because we knew that those financial consequences were going to spin off for years down the road. And that you wouldn't just be dealing with, oh, it's a 2001 problem. Actually, that problem, when you looked at all the things that were done and the costs that were incurred, spread through at least another 5 or 6 years.
Wow, okay. And did it also cost a couple of $1 billion on top of everything else?
Oh, easily for consumers across the region. Just for the Bonneville Power Administration alone, we lost just under $1 billion that year, in a year in which we were forecasted to make money going into the year.
Wow.
So yes, there is a tremendous consequence for consumers across the Pacific Northwest, as well as there was a separate set of consequences in California for all the utilities down there.
Dang. And it was the combination of super low water and then, well, maybe you could just, what happened?
Yeah, so we knew going into that year that, again, we did not have enough resources to serve load under the worst possible conditions. What happened were the worst possible conditions. So we got low water. We're a very hydro-dependent region, and for the most part, that really helps us. It gives us some of the lowest rates in the country. It generally gives us high reliability. But if you get very low water, then it really challenges your system as to whether you have enough energy to be able to serve all the loads that are out there. And we got the worst year in 80 years, and it just flowed through the system, and it just kept getting worse and worse. The prices started going up in November and December because the people who were buying power could see that there was likely not going to be enough energy. It spiked in January, got extraordinarily high, came back down a little bit in February and March, but still, by historical standards, ridiculously high. And then by the summer, it had passed. But in that short time frame of basically November through May, incredible costs were incurred that are hard to comprehend in terms of just how much impact it had all the way across the Pacific Northwest.
And those aluminum jobs, a lot of them never came back?
A lot of them never came back. Yeah, and that's always been very hard for me, to recognize that we had struggled to save the aluminum industry for 20 years, basically, in the Northwest. And one could argue that it was going to happen sooner or later, but maybe not. We don't know. All we know is at that point, the cord got cut. And those jobs that we actually had hoped would come back, some of them did, but most of them did not.
Wow, okay. So you're in a unique position to feel the danger standing here now and looking forward.
I've kept a picture on my desk for 20 years that was a conversation with aluminum workers. 300 of them showed up at my office one day with picket signs and my name emblazoned on t-shirts. And I've always remembered just how difficult a time that was and how important it is that we take action to try to make sure it doesn't happen again.
Yeah, okay. And do you have thoughts on what that action should be?
Well, I'm not going to say I know for sure exactly what actions we need to take on the generation side and on the supply side, because there are an array of choices that can be made. And some of it comes down to our values too, certain types of environmental values that we have. And I don't really feel like it's my job to impose that will on the region. What I do think is we need to be absolutely clear that this is a problem that needs to be addressed and that we are serious about going after it and addressing it. One of the things that happened in 2000 and 2001 was many of those people who were hurt said, I wasn't paying attention. That was your job to pay attention to that. So what we're trying to do is say, look, it actually takes a combination of leadership within the electric utility industry, but also the support of the public, candidly. Because if we are going to take action, it will have impacts. And we're going to need public support in order to be able to take some of the difficult actions that need to be taken to avoid these incredibly bad consequences.
Do you get a sense that most of the public's not paying attention?
I think most of the public is like me. not different from me. Do I really know what's going on with the water system and the wastewater system? And I like to try to stay up on what's going on in the schools, but do I really know what's going on? Honestly, unless somebody comes up to me and really grabs me by the lapels and says, there's something big going on here, I'm working on my stuff at work and I'm raising my family and I'm doing all the things that I got to do. So do I think that people understand the potential consequences of this right now? Generally, no. Am I surprised at that? No. Do I hope that we can be able to get people's attention? Yes, I do.
Because it's big.
Because it's big, right. There's a lot at stake here. And it's not just about money, and it's not just about whether the lights go out for an hour or two or something like that. It's much more significant than that. Mm-hmm. The human consequences here are as big as you can get.
Yeah. Super big picture. I may have already asked you this at the beginning, but it was so interesting what you were talking about, I forgot. Is the era of coal done?
The era of coal is on its way out, for sure, at least in the Pacific Northwest, not all the way across the country. We are fortunate in that we have this incredible hydropower system that produces about 55 to 60% of the electricity in this region. And consequently, we have a lot less coal. Our carbon emissions per megawatt hour in the Northwest are among the lowest in the country. So it will be less of a challenge for us to phase out coal than it will be in the Midwest or the Southeast or other places. With that said, in the Northwest, yes, the pathway that we are on is certainly to reduce and potentially eliminate the use of coal in this system by somewhere probably in the mid to late 2020s.
Wow, okay. And then, again, I know about this much of your subject, but I'm reading that a lot of local governments don't want more natural gas plants, and there's a question whether the renewables, solar and wind, are enough. So that's where I start to wonder, is there going to be a gap between the need and the supply?
So solar and wind and hydropower are going to be the cornerstone resources for the future in the Pacific Northwest. There's no question about that, I think, in anybody's mind that's close to this question. The difficulty is that the solar and wind is not what we call dispatchable. And dispatchable means you can turn it on and off on our side, that the utility can turn it on. And remember that it's very difficult to store electricity.
Yeah.
So when you flip a light switch someplace, either direction, it makes a generator either turn faster or slower someplace. There's an instantaneous reaction to that. And with solar and wind, when you flip the light switch, you can't make the sun shine brighter or the wind blow harder or the opposite direction. So we're going to need some resources that can allow people to be able to flip light switches at whatever time they want. And we're also going to need some resources that can deal with extended temperature excursions. And what I mean by that is high temperatures for a long period of time or low temperatures for a long period of time. Both of those really stress an electric power system, in particular a hydropower system. So we're going to need some of those kinds of resources in order to be able to make it work. Today, the resource that does that best is a natural gas-fired generation. Will that be what we need? I can't say for sure, but until we can find something that is a good substitute for that, that's the premier resource to at least cover the very small fractions of time, and it's not very often, that we will need to make sure that we've got the ability to move the system when we need to.
So what about the dams, and what about the advocates who want the dams taken out?
Yeah, so if you want a clean, reliable, and affordable grid, and we think that's what the public wants, it wants all three. It's not going to be satisfied with 1 out of 3 or 2 out of 3. It needs to be clean, reliable, and affordable. We have a head start on the rest of the country because we have this incredible hydropower system that not only is low cost, but is the premier generating resource from a reliability perspective. So taking elements of that hydropower system out make the challenge of being clean, reliable, and affordable much, much more difficult. So yes, we believe that it's going to be a cornerstone for the future of the Northwest power grid to have this hydropower that we've got.
Okay. Finally, when you first started seeing these projections that would go out and the number was up around the 30%, what was your reaction to that? Do you remember?
Yeah, it was, here we go again. It was been here before and done that. Now again, the circumstances are not exactly the same. I could go through a long list of why they're different, some better and some worse than 1999 and 2000. But the fact of the matter is, we knew there was a problem, and we were drawn in by the fact that energy prices were low, and energy prices are low today, and we were not providing the right incentives to create generation, demand response, whatever it takes in order to bring loads and resources into balance. Because again, it was a fundamental supply and demand problem. And the sense of, oh my gosh, I feel like I've seen this play before.
And it's not a happy movie.
It's not a happy movie at the ending in 2001. That doesn't mean it can't be a happy movie in 2025 if we do this right. And that's why we're here today.